The American Transcendentalist philosophers were a group of thinkers who appeared around New England in the 1830s. Their core principles included a spiritual passion for self-knowledge, a focus on self-reliance, and a fascination with nature. But what did they have to do with Dartmoor? Well, next to nothing. But they're interesting, and what's the point in having your own podcast if you can't talk about whatever you like? Welcome back to the Dartmoor podcast. The American Transcendentalists weren't a religion as such, but they were deeply spiritual. They were pantheistic, believing that God was in everything and everything was God, and that includes us. God and man and nature were not, to the Transcendentalists, three different corners of a triangle, but all one and the same. From this starting point, they reasoned that believing in intuition, following your heart and trusting your gut were to follow divine instruction. Words, either from the wisest of teachers or the most sacred of holy texts, could not teach you truth in the way that you might experience it for yourself. This meant that religion, society, and history were the source of all corruption. Their attempts to instruct, control, and educate us were the cause of our sufferings. They sought to suppress our animal nature and wrench us away from the divine. And what was the best way to escape the shackles of society and experience truth, God, and the self? By heading out into the hills and observing nature. Maybe Dartmoor is a good place to discuss the American Transcendentalists after all. If God was in nature and God was in you, then you could understand yourself better by understanding nature. And if you understood yourself better, then you knew God better, and became one step closer to transcending the suffering of existence. Now, some of you clever clogses out there will be saying, they sound a bit like the Romantics. And you'd be right, there are definitely some similarities. A few decades earlier, across the Atlantic, the seminal poets Wordsworth, Coleridge, and later Blake were writing passionate, spontaneous poetry about the importance of individual freedom and the glory of nature that they called the sublime. The sublime, that feeling of awe and wonder experienced when seeing a burning sunset sink beneath the horizon, when staring up into an infinite depth of stars, or when watching a ferocious storm hurl the sea against the land. And both the Romantics and the American Transcendentalists were, at least in part, railing against the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. Science had peeled away the layers of mystery and stolen the magic from the world, while industry had stolen our innocence and freedom, forcing us into a tedious cycle of toil for profit. But there are some differences. I mean, the Romantics were definitely weirder for starters, and there were almost certainly fewer drugs involved with the Transcendentalists. And where the Romantics sought their nature kicks in the dramatic awe of the sublime, the Transcendentalists were somewhat more quiet and pragmatic. Their de facto leader, Ralph Waldo Emerson, for example, claimed that he could see God in a muddy puddle. There he is. There was no need to observe fantastic pilgrimages to holy temples or travel the world to experience great natural wonders. There was enough to wonder at in your own rainy little patch of East Dartmoor on a dreary February day. The great American poet Walt Whitman, himself inspired by the American Transcendentalists, put it best. A mouse is miracle enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. Right, I started by saying they weren't a religion, then mentioned God 8 times, and started talking about glory, magic, miracles, and infidels. But the American Transcendentalists weren't exactly religious. They didn't believe in an afterlife for a start, instead saying that we need to focus on the here and now, and that it's what we do with this life that matters. In fact, Emerson said, the one thing in the world of value is the active soul. We should be seeking, searching, exploring, and striving to improve ourselves in the present. And not by studying books and listening to others either, but by getting out there and grabbing life with both hands. But then he also said he had become a transparent eyeball through which all the currents of the universe flowed. So, well, there you go. No one took this pragmatic hands-on approach to living life fully more seriously than American Transcendentalism's number 2. Henry David Thoreau. Famously, he turned his back on society and retreated to live in the wilderness, a secluded wood near a tranquil lake called Walden Pond, where he strove to live as simply and remotely as possible. And in his 2 years living in a small shack with only the simplest of necessities, he wrote an influential account of his experience. Walden, or Life in the Woods. What he said about this genuinely gives me shivers. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, to discover that I had not lived. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms. And if it proved to be mean, why then, to get the whole and genuine meanness of it and publish its meanness to the world. Or if it were sublime, to know it by experience and to be able to give a true account of it in my next excursion. Among its many insights, Walden espouses the beauty and pleasure gained from living simply. Once you strip life down to the necessities, you can stop worrying about how much you want and instead focus on how little you need. He sustained himself on 1 day's work a week, growing beans mostly, and would walk 30 miles to town to sell his crop, realising that although it took a day to walk to market, it would take more than a day's work to earn the money to travel there by a coach. Living in this way allowed him much time to be present in the moment, not worrying about the past or the future or his beans, but just being. And he just writes so beautifully about nature and the serenity of solitude too. Here's one of my favourite passages. This is a delicious evening when the whole body is one sense and imbibes delight through every pore. I go and come with a strange liberty in nature, a part of herself. As I walk along the stony shore of the pond in my shirt sleeves, though it is cool as well as cloudy and windy, and I see nothing special to attract me, all the elements are unusually congenial to me. The bullfrogs trump to usher in the night, and the note of the whippoorwill is borne on the rippling wind from over the water. Sympathy with the fluttering alder and poplar leaves almost takes away my breath. Yet, like the lake, my serenity is rippled but not ruffled. The third member of the American Transcendentalists that needs mentioning is Margaret Fuller. Unlike Thoreau, she wasn't all about solitude, rather she wanted to take some of the Transcendentalists' ideas and use them to improve society. Because of their belief in the insight of the individual, you see, the Transcendentalists often disagreed with one another. Indeed, they might even disagree and argue vehemently against something that they themselves argued vehemently for yesterday. Consistency, said Emerson, was the hobgoblin of little minds. Fuller, focusing on the idea that the divine spark was in each of us, spent her vast intellect writing and campaigning for equal rights for women. But not content with just leading the first wave of feminism, she also fought for the abolition of slavery, the reform of the prison systems, the rights of Native Americans, and even animal rights. Yep, she was pretty damn woke for the 1830s. Almost 200 years later, can we find any use for the philosophies of the American Transcendentalists? I think so. We could try and curb our rampant consumption of, well, everything, especially superficial or short-lasting items, and probably be happier for it. We could try and think for ourselves a bit more. It's so easy nowadays to be swept along by a social media narrative. Use your intuition to decide what's right and wrong. But then examine why your intuition led you that way. Spend more time thinking about thinking. And of course, we could all do with finding ourselves in nature. Why not plan yourself a nice little trip up onto Dartmoor and sit somewhere beautiful, away from your worries, and turn into a transparent eyeball for a bit? And I can't leave you without playing Chekhov's guitar. The American Transcendentalists have nothing to do with Dartmoor, and neither Dartmoor nor the American Transcendentalists have anything to do with Bob Dylan. But there is one obscure song of his, a favourite of mine, called Lay Down Your Weary Tune, which always makes me think of them. And I thought that playing it, backed by a choir of woodland birds, would be a nice way to end the episode. If you suffer from bad cringies, I suggest you hide behind a pillow or bite down on an appendage now.
Struck by the sounds before the sun, I knew the night had gone. The morning breeze like a bugle blew against the drums of the dawn. Lay down your weary tune, lay down the song you strum, and rest yourself beneath the strength of strings no voice can hold to hum. I stood unbound beneath the skies, and clouds enchained by loss. The crying rain like a trumpet sang, and asked for no applause. Lay down your weary tune, lay down the song you strum, and rest yourself beneath the strength of strings no voice can hold to hum. The last of leaves fell from the trees, clung to a new love's breast. The branches bare like a banjo moans to the winds that listen the best. I gazed into the river's mirror, I watched its winding strum. The water smooth ran like a hymn, and like a heart did hum. Lay down your weary tune, lay down the song you strum, and rest yourself beneath the strength of strings no voice can hold to hum.
Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.